Hey everybody, welcome to Critical Thoughts. I'm your host, Braxton Smith, and joining me today is special guest Adam Kokesh, who is a passive resistance activist, star of the hit YouTube series Adam vs. the Man, and author of the book Freedom, and is currently one of the Libertarian Party's presidential nominees.
Hey, well, thanks for that great intro. I've never thought of myself as the star of Adam versus the Man. I am Adam versus the Man.
Right. Well, so you want to give a little bit on your platform, though, on your presidential platform before we start dropping some bombs, so to speak?
Sure, I appreciate that, Brent. Yeah, because this really is the most important part of everything I've done in my entire life and what I'm doing right now. I am running for president as a libertarian on the platform of the peaceful, orderly, responsible dissolution of the entire United States federal government. We are turning the presidential election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. Now, every time I say I'm running for president or someone says that I'm running for president, I have to say I cringe a little bit, because I don't think there's anything more anti-freedom you can say than, I want to be president of the United States. I want to be in charge of this giant, evil, violent monopoly so that I can force my will on the entire country. No, I mean, it's insane. And so I always have to point out in explaining the platform that I am really not running for president in order to be president. The very first thing I'm going to do as president, and really the only thing I'm going to do, is sign one executive order. And the executive order includes my resignation. I resign from being president to be custodian of the federal government. So as a custodial institution, I'm simply leading it through a bankruptcy proceeding. And the proceeding will be laid out, all of the details, as much as possible in advance in this executive order. And we're going to have this on our website so it's clear by the Libertarian Party convention in 2020. So by the time I'm actually asking for anybody's actual vote in any substantive way, you will know exactly what you are voting for, and it's not for me to be president, it's for this exact plan. For the first time in American history, the American people will have a real choice in the presidential election. They can vote for a Republican schmuck, a Democratic schmuck, or this exact plan that leaves us with 50 independent states, 5 autonomous territories, and up to 562 sovereign native nations. Now, when I say peaceful, orderly process, that has to be explained, of course. But the most important thing is that on day one, with the signing of this executive order, we declare the federal government of no authority and bankrupt. So no federal laws are going to be enforced. It goes from being a corporation with a public mandate with authorization from the American people, which is, a bullshit construct anyway, but to a custodial institution that's going through a bankruptcy proceeding. So 95% of the personnel in most federal agencies go home on day one. They get 2 months notice from the election to taking office, and that's it. They're gone. In most agencies, the IRS, Department of Energy, Department of Education, Department of Commerce, I can keep going. There are a lot that serve no legitimate purpose whatsoever. All they do is pass down mandates, regulations, or steal from people in the form of taxation. So in those agencies, you send home at least 95% of the personnel day one, gone. And what you have is a skeleton crew to handle the records and the physical properties for the purposes of dissolution. Now, the records, one of the coolest things about this platform is we get to release all the records. No more secrets, no more lies, no more hidden, conspiracies. All of the technology developed by government now becomes public domain. But there's one caveat to this. In order to do it responsibly, you have to redact the information that the federal government has that should never be made public. That is private personal information, personal financial records, things like that, obviously. So I'm not going to say, let's make the damage worse because the government has stolen this information. That's private information. Let's make it public. No, that's not going to happen. So those records are going to go to one agency. There's going to be a central clearinghouse for all of those records. might be the Library of Congress, but each agency is going to take their records, hand them over to that clearinghouse for the records, and then they're going to take their physical property, and when it's ready to be sold, to be liquidated, it's going to get, again, consolidated to another agency that's going to be handling that. Might be the Department of Defense, because they seem to be the one that controls the largest number of individual economic, physical resources that will be liquidated. So it seems logical that we would be handling that liquidation through the Department of Defense. And gosh, I got to say, I cringe every time I refer to it, even by its proper name, as in its propaganda name, the Department of Defense, because we know that it, as the founders would have pointed out, militaries exist to protect governments and government's ability to rule and govern and control and tax and exploit, and that a militia is the only legitimate defense of a free people. But there are some agencies that have more complex processes that they're going to have to go through. CIA, FBI, NSA, they have large economic resources that need to be handled appropriately, de-weaponized, and then liquidated. Now, some agencies that perform legitimate functions, like, say, the Department of Transportation. And I'm not here to tell you that we need government to build the roads, obviously. But I can tell you this, I can prove it from my own personal experience, because when I bought my little Freedom Farm in Arizona, it did not connect to any existing roads.
So you had to shut it down.
So what did I do? I built a road, and with no government help whatsoever. In fact, with government only trying to impede my efforts there for development. And but the Department of Transportation, and as far as managing infrastructure resources, is providing a legitimate economic function, and we don't want to just get rid of that. It is going to be apportioned among the states. Very simple process of localizing that agency. Other agencies that similarly have those practical functions get localized down to the states. Department of Defense, you liquidate all the foreign bases, you liquidate all the offensive weaponry, you let go all the personnel that do not serve legitimate defensive purposes, and the remaining resources are apportioned among the states. Now, the most important thing here, because I'm going in as a bankruptcy agent, is that I have to adhere to the basic ethical standards of a bankruptcy agent. I'm a handler of stolen property. And so much has been stolen from the American people over the years, it's going to be impossible to say, well, you had this stolen from you, you had this stolen from you, we're going to give you this back, because it's all been so jumbled over the centuries that we are never going to have perfect economic justice. But the best that we can do is the responsibility of those of us who have the opportunity to redistribute those resources. And I'm not talking redistribution in a government sense. I'm talking about redistributing them back to the people they were stolen from. Not the foreign banks, not the foreign governments, not the foreign corporations that own the federal debt on paper. No, that is not a legitimate debt. We are disowning that, writing off. And frankly, one of the things that's exciting about ending the federal government is that we get to end the intergenerational child abuse that is the national debt. Absolutely. Because it is unethical, it is criminal what this country does, forcing our children to pay for things that they never had a say in. It is insane that we have allowed the government to impose this on our children. So that's done. But with the liquidated assets, it is my responsibility to do the best that I can to repay the true creditors of the American federal government, and that is the American people. So when we're liquidating the federal government, we take the remaining resources, we put them into Social Security, the VA, and with any remaining funds, Medicare, Medicaid, S-chip, so that we are not pulling the rug out from underneath anybody, and that those funds can be distributed as broadly as possible. Ultimately, this is just the first step in a long chain of events that is going to lead us to a voluntary society. Because we get rid of the federal government, then we're going to see a race among the state governments to dissolve as soon as they possibly can, down to the county level, and then county governments are going to dissolve. And at that point, we have government down at the community and individual level where it is voluntary. And that is the objective of localization, of decentralizing power, because government as we know it now. I'm not talking about corporate government. I'm not talking about community government or voluntary government. But when we say government, we know we're talking about the coercive, violent institution. And when you define it, not describe it, not identify it, but when you define it, you understand that government is an institution that claims to have a monopoly on the initiation of force in a specific territory. And the initiation of force, that is using violence or threatening violence against peaceful people, is unethical, and it is holding back humanity. The sooner we end it, the happier we will be.
Well, damn, man, you knocked out like half my questions right there.
Yeah.
But I gotta say though, like at first, when I first heard you, you were selling me on the platform at the Libertarian Convention in Georgia, and I was kind of into it, but I wasn't really fully on board until recently when Trump came out and signed off that omnibus bill. And then I realized, everybody was on board with him because he's not a politician, he's a businessman. And he proved that he's just like the other presidents. I mean, he did a few great things, but just like you were talking about, and it's not just our children. I think at $24 trillion, by the time you get a hold of it, we're talking about our grandchildren's futures here. And so, at that point, I mean, that's a lot of money you got to dissolve, though. I mean, what do you think about all the, the countries and the Federal Reserve? I mean, somebody's that's a lot of money to just bankrupt, like just to write off.
Well, hold on a second. Before I answer that question, Brax, I gotta turn this back on you.
Okay.
Now, because that was that omnibus bill and the way it was handled and Trump's statement on it. Yes, they were particularly offensive. Trump came out and said, "I don't really want to sign this, but I'm going to sign it anyway." That's like, I don't want to punch you in the face, but I'm going to just keep punching you in the face. I can't help it, but I have to do it. It's or it's like grabbing your fist and saying, why are you hitting yourself? It's that kind of like you think you're dumb. Like we don't know, but in Trump's State of the Union, I mean, I could go back. But in Trump's State of the Union, there's one thing that was really offensive to me as a veteran that he said, which was that we need to make sure that Americans with terminal illnesses are able to seek and pursue experimental treatments, even if they're not government approved, without having to leave the country and go abroad, right? He doesn't want the government to be an impediment to people with terminal illnesses having the freedom to treat themselves how they see fit. And yet we have a little problem in this country. If you haven't noticed, there's an epidemic of veteran suicides. At least 20 veterans a day commit suicide in this country. But he would not say a damn thing about allowing veterans to pursue treatments for PTSD that the government has deemed illegal, most notably marijuana, which is not a cure, but a very effective symptomatic treatment that allows veterans to pursue the talk therapy that is a potential cure for PTSD. MDMA, proven cure for PTSD. Donald Trump is keeping it illegal. Psilocybin mushrooms, similar promise shown. Donald Trump is keeping it illegal. Donald Trump is personally responsible for 20 veteran suicides a day as long as he doesn't address the issue and get out of veterans' way and give us the freedom to seek treatment however we want. Now, I mean, that's just one example. But like that didn't bother you? And by the way, we're planning something right now, and this is a bit of a pre-announcement because we don't have the details confirmed. We're working on that this week here in Houston, Texas. But in New Orleans in 2018, and July this year, July 4 weekend, when the Libertarian National Convention happens, we are going to be conducting with Military for Kokesh, March of the Dead Veterans. We are going to be mustering in a giant formation at the VA hospital that's very close to the convention center and marching in formation behind a casket that contains the names of all of the veterans who have committed suicide since the start of the global war on terror while wearing skeleton masks. Because the Libertarian Party is the only party that frankly gives a damn about the problem of veteran suicides. Obviously, the Republicans and Democrats in power are perfectly happy to kill veterans on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry. And if you think I'm exaggerating, let me just tell you my own story really quick on this. when I went to the VA and I told them I was having trouble sleeping when I got out of the Marines after coming back from Iraq, I walked out of there with a little brown paper bag, 5 prescriptions.
Yep.
3 of them had suicide listed as a side effect. They are literally killing veterans on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry and making criminals out of those who are brave enough to treat themselves with the medicine that they know is good for them. So, no, just anyway, the answer to this is very simple. End the drug war and get a reset on the war on drugs completely and give the VA to the veterans. That's my platform for the VA. I don't need to end the VA. It provides legitimate services, right? We don't want to pull the rug out from underneath anyone. As an ANCAP, okay, all right, we're going to pull the rug out from under the IRS agents and all the other government leaks like that. But we don't need to pull the rug out from underneath the people who are given legitimate services that they depend on by government in order to do this. My problem with the VA is not that it exists, it's that it is controlled by bureaucrats and it's funded by taxation. So we spin it off as a private institution, give it a small endowment as a portion of the liquidation, and give every single veteran in America one ownership voting share. Reset on the drug war, give the VA to veterans. I guarantee you will not have 20 veteran suicides a day. But to get back to your support of Trump here, it was that. Now I don't want to put you on the spot too much, Brax. But as someone who believes in freedom, how could you even support someone who is so deliberately anti-freedom as Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, his policies so far have been pretty solid. I would make the argument, and this would have to be a video for another time, but I would make the argument he's the most libertarian president we had since Coolidge. I know it's unpopular to say, but up until the omnibus, which that just wrecked it, but that's why I said.
We could argue that he's nowhere near libertarian. I mean, by libertarian, let's be clear. We mean an ethical person. If you're not a libertarian, you're advocating for something that is unethical. You're advocating for the initiation of force. You're advocating for violence to be used against peaceful people. So to say that Donald Trump is most libertarian of all the presidents we've had is like saying he's my favorite kind of cancer. He's the least painful kind of cancer that you could possibly die from. But I'm sorry, Brax. Now after all of that, I'm sorry. I get a little worked up talking about the issue of veteran suicides. Obviously, I'm a Marine veteran. I was in Fallujah in 2004. Now I completely forgot what your other question was at the end of that.
Yeah, no, I totally get you. We have a lot of priorities, and I can understand that being a top one for you. But what I was asking, though, is whenever we dissolve this debt, obviously we're going to make a lot of enemies. There's going to be a lot of pissed off people. Well,
okay, so you're concerned about those paper debtors, the foreign banks, foreign governments, foreign corporations who own the debt on paper being pissed off at the American people. Certainly an issue. However, 2 things. First of all, are you a fan of Bitcoin?
Yes, I am. More so now, holder of Nexus, though. But
all right. I'm a fan of all cryptocurrencies. More importantly, I'm an advocate of anything that you can use for money that is not a Federal Reserve note for lots of obvious reasons, right? Like, why use a money that allows the government to steal from you, that allows them to rip us off through the inflation tax? But cryptocurrencies in particular. So let me ask you, Brax, what happens when everybody starts using cryptocurrency?
Well, the U.S. dollar would become irrelevant. Most of your global currencies would become irrelevant.
And the dollar continues its decline, but really it goes, instead of just being on this engineered decline, it goes down to the inflationary death spiral. So all of those debts that are measured in U.S. dollars go
paid off in one Bitcoin. All right.
So we might end up now. Well, I'm hoping that by the time we win, the dollar has already gone to zero, and that we'll be liquidating the federal government for cryptocurrency. But that's not the case, it will be soon after. And I like to use myself as an example in this, in that I still use the dollar for some things that I have to, but very minimally. I have a vehicle. I pay for this RV. It's not my name, but I pay the insurance for it that I have to pay in U.S. dollars. But I don't save any U.S. dollars. I don't hold any U.S. dollars any more than I have to for those functional things. And I do as much of my business as possible in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So I would like to think that at this point, I probably represent in that sense, less than 5% of the population. By the time we get to the point where 51% of the American electorate is ready to say, yeah, we don't need the federal government anymore, I'll vote to dissolve that, I think we will have more than enough people doing at least what I'm doing. And as more people embrace Bitcoin, as more people start using cryptocurrency, the mechanisms, the crypto economy grows, develops, the technology, the ease, the convenience, the number of people who you can do business with in Bitcoin increases so much. I can't imagine that the dollar is going to survive to that point. We are on the verge of a very critical tipping point, where when we get to this critical mass of adoption of cryptocurrencies, all fiat currencies all over the world go away. Now, to answer your question more directly about the threat of people who might not like us, and now we're talking about governments, and yes, governments are made up of people, but a government is not people. No, governments are evil constructs. They are ideas. They do not actually exist. You can't hold a government in your hand and say, here's the government. The reality of what we are doing is so important and is going to have such a large impact, especially considering that we live in the age of the internet. The federal government is not going to be able to go away without the rest of the world noticing. Now, some people will say, but Adam, what if China invades the United States? Well, we'll be much, and you know better on the security state issues. But already, well, that's good, because now they're not going to be able to use the federal government and the manipulations of the economy to buy this place out anyway. But really, if the Chinese government says, hey, China, to the people, the United States federal government doesn't exist, let's invade. The people of China are not going to be going, yeah, more war, more central government, more power to the government and the violent, crazy psychopaths who rule us. No. People all over the world are going to be looking at their governments going, do we really need you? And the answer in the age of the internet is going to be an overwhelming no.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a good point on China, because I think that's everyone's biggest concern is China invading us. And one, they're communists, so they don't have the resources. And two, like you said, they're going to invade us to get their money back. If the U.S. dollar is worthless, then what's the point? But I think the biggest point you just made, that was like a light bulb went off in my head, is the fact that the U.S. government is paying some of its debts to the Chinese right now by giving away federal land that they seized from the states. A majority of our country is actually federally owned, actually, come to find out. Well, several states anyways, like Utah I think is one of them. But so for my next question, one of the last, I guess, tougher ones anyways, actually, I got your book, read it a bit. I got the hard copy and the PDF. It's both are available. We'll provide links to get to that. But I had one little question that you kind of touched on a bit. But there's one part where you said, what is it? The alternative to localization is to fight inch by inch, law by law. If we adopt this strategy, we will continue to lose ground as politicians pat us on the head for engaging in political process, while they laugh and take another mile behind our backs. So I just wanted to clarify, though, you were talking about, so we're going to dissolve the federal government, and exactly how long did you think we'd be functioning on a state level?
That's a really good question. It's kind of hard to predict, but I can kind of give you the rough idea of how I envision this happening. Because, like I said, day one, federal government, no authority, most agencies, we send 95% of the personnel home immediately. For the agencies like the Department of Transportation that need to be localized down to the states, that's a process that might take a couple of years, right? And for the Department of Defense, that's a really big one. FBI, CIA, NSA, those big security state agencies that, what do you do with the NSA server farms? Untangling that, handling that data may take several years.
You just burn it.
And no, because, hey, if you're an ANCAP, if you're really an anarcho-capitalist, your concern should be creation of value, right? Preservation of value. So no, we don't want to destroy any legitimate resources. The only thing that we would want to do to really materially change what the federal government possesses is to de-weaponize it before we liquidate it. But then the military, that's really the big one, is the U.S. military. So just bringing all the troops home from abroad and selling the foreign bases, that might take 6 months to a year. Then separating the offensive weaponry from the defensive weaponry. We're going to have that planned out in advance. But then de-weaponizing the offensive weaponry and selling it off, that might take a couple of years. Figuring out exactly how to apportion the defensive functions of the U.S. military to the states might take a few years as well. So, I think that the process as a whole will be, and it depends how you want to count percentages here, right? Because Social Security is going to be able to continue as an independent private institution for decades. We want to fund it for long enough for the market to come up with better alternatives, for states and communities to come up with better alternatives. So the meat of the dissolution of the federal government will be done within 2 or 3 years. And then there's some elements, that might have a longer tail coming off of that. But there's going to be a period for, 2 or 3 years after that where we go, okay, are we stable? Is everybody comfortable at the state level? And I think what happens next is that I think that period will not be more than 10 years. I really cannot imagine it taking more than 10 years. And then when we see states going down to the county level, I think that's going to be a little bit faster. Not only are we dealing with smaller institutions, but we've already done it on the big scale. We've already figured out all of the major, mechanics of this administrative process. So state governments going to county governments, maybe 5 years, and then county governments dissolving down to communities and individuals. That's something that is going to vary a lot from place to place. But really, when you think about it, for us as libertarians, if we got government in the United States all the way down to the county level, where you could secede on your own property, where you could break off and start your own community as a completely sovereign entity if you wanted to, we're done. I'm going to retire at that point. You know what I mean? I'm not going to, we don't, government is the more local government is, the more voluntary it is, because the easier it is to leave or to separate yourself from it. And at that point, it's so close to voluntary that I don't really care if one community, they consolidate all their resources for law enforcement in a county sheriff's office, and instead of having, perfect free market DROs, they want to keep their county sheriff around for a few decades. I'm not going to care about that. But the general process, we get rid of the federal government, we get rid of the state governments, and the county governments, like I said, maybe a long tail there. But getting to that point where government is at its shadow of itself, 2 or 3 decades tops.
Right. And I think a big turnoff to a lot of people is, a lot of people will say, well, Abraham Lincoln tried so hard to keep the Union together. And, what I would say to that is the dissolution. I mean, we have this huge schism right now. We have, these violent protests happen all over the country. Like, California and Texas cannot exist under one federal, cookie-cutter law. They need their own localities. They need their own individual laws because we are individuals. Like we just
that's the awesome power of this platform, is that we don't have to argue ideology in order to get people on board. And, you know, among libertarians, we disagree all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, there's all sorts of arguments about the ideals of this, that, or the other. But I've never heard a libertarian say, but we need to have the federal government existing indefinitely. You know, we can agree on that. People in Texas and California can agree that people in San Francisco shouldn't be writing laws for people in San Antonio. So, in a way, this is the libertarians taking charge, showing leadership, saying, look, I don't need to challenge your ideology. I don't need you to read a dozen books by Rothbard. It's nice that you read Adam's one little, 100-page book, free audio book. But we don't need to argue ideology with people who aren't ideologues, who don't think that way. Most human beings are creatures of pragmatism. And I used to make this huge mistake, this big false assumption that drove my activism, is that we have to wake up everybody. We have to have a paradigm shift before we can have real change. And it's true that there's a paradigm shift happening. And it's true that it's happening in concurrence with the evolution towards a voluntary society. But we don't have to have a paradigm shift towards, or a complete paradigm shift to voluntarism, if we can just get people on board with the policy of localization, because this is how we apply our principles to immediately improve everyone's lives.
All right. Okay. So we're solid on your platform. I think you've made that very clear. But, in our last video, we're talking about how Trump had proven himself to be another politician, right? A puppet of the shadow government. So, I think your platform hits a majority of voters. A majority of people just don't vote. So,
well, can I give you the breakdown on that? Because I've done the numbers.
Let's do the
numbers. And it's not a majority of people don't vote. It's consistently around 60% vote in presidential elections. That's 40% who consistently never vote. And what I hear on the campaign trail more than anything else is, I would never vote, but I'll come out and vote for that. It'll be the last federal election you ever have to vote in, and I'll be the last president that you'll never need. But of those 40%, we're not going to get all of them, and that's okay. I would think that about half of those 40%, and this is just, not based on any more research than 4 national tours where I've gone out and talked to regular people all over the country, but of those 40%, maybe half of them really just don't give a damn and can't be bothered. And that's okay. We write them off. 20% of the population never going to care. That's fine. But the other 20% are some kind of conscientious non-voters, right? They know it's a waste of time. They know that it's bullshit. Now, of the other 60%, only about 30%, and usually less really, vote consistently in all the off-year elections, all the congressional elections, all the special elections, all the local races. And in some of them, it's down to like 15 or 20%. But let's round it up for their benefit and say 30%, will vote consistently no matter what. Red team go, blue team go. It's our duty to vote. If we don't vote, the country goes to hell. Mm-hmm. And so that means that's the base of the Republicans and Democrats. 30% of the population. That's 15 and 15 each. Of the other 30, and we could write them off completely too, and still win, because the other 30% of that 60% votes reluctantly. They only vote consistently in presidential elections. And they are the ones who will say, you know what, I'm sick of this. Give me a real choice. Show me a serious option, and I'll come vote for something else. So that's 20% of conscientious non-voters, 30% of reluctant voters versus 15 Republican, 15 Democrat. 50 versus 15 and 15, 30. That's for both of the old parties. We have a real clear shot at an electoral majority that if all we do is get this message in front of the American people in a credible way, we win.
Okay, and we have that 20% that you said probably just don't give a shit. I would wager there's actually, and what do you say to the people in that group that actually don't vote because they saw what happened in 2012 when Ron Paul had the election stolen from him, and they saw in 2016 when Bernie Sanders had not that I'm a fan of him, but still, it's like they're disenfranchised. They're like, if voting mattered, it'd be illegal. What do you say to those potential voters out there?
Well, hold on. I'm saying that of the 40% who never vote,
yeah,
20%. It's 20% who really don't care. That means I'm not going to talk to them.
Okay.
I'm not even going to try to motivate them. I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if they came out, but I'm talking about people who are, overwhelmed with personal problems, people who are suffering from, serious drug addiction and mental health issues, and like they really just don't care about society. We're not going to get 100% of people to care and engage. That's fine. What I'm talking about getting is the other 20% of conscientious non-voters, the people that that you just described there.
Okay.
And those ones, those are the easiest. All I have to do is say, hey, look, I'm going to dissolve the federal government. Please come out and vote once, and they'll. They're already there. It's for those people. They already get it. That's our easiest target audience right there.
Right. So I think the issue though was with the primaries. They were rigged though. Like obviously Ron Paul won the primaries. Obviously Bernie Sanders won the primaries, but the voting was rigged. There's a lot of people that just feel like the whole election is rigged, and I'm just wondering what you think about like the possibility that, because I mean. They
would say, why bother voting if it's going to be stolen anyway?
Yeah.
So, it doesn't matter who votes. It only matters who counts the votes, right?
That's it.
Well,
yes.
Yeah. Now, I've heard another objection, too, similar to that. Well, what if they just shoot you, Adam? And I've risked my life for far less worthy causes in the past before. But to the question of whether or not we're going to have a fair election in 2020, we're not. Well, I'm not expecting government to fundamentally change that way. The thing is, we have come to the point in the age of the internet where we have direct public accountability called exit polling and surveys that are irrefutable. Now, yes, those can be manipulated as well. So we're not going to win with 34% to the old party's 33-33. It's not going to work that way. The only way we are going to win is if we do have a fundamental, I guess you could call it a paradigm shift, but we have a fundamental shift in this country about how we think about government, how we think about the federal government. We're not going to win with 51%. We might have to have 60% to win. But when we get this message in front of the American people, that's what we're going to have.
Man, I think it's one of those things too. If it takes multiple times too, just the idea that you're getting your message out there and you do receive so much gravity. If we can get 10 or even 20%, that's a huge message to a lot of people that you are easily a viable option. Okay.
Yes. Now there is the possibility that we don't reach that threshold in 2020. That all we do is continue the relatively linear progress of the Libertarian Party. And, we have a breakout year and we get to 10%. And it might be that in 2024, I really can't imagine that that's really all it takes. We plant the flag in 2020. There's no way we lose in 24. Yeah. But yeah, I'll run as long as it takes.
Good. Okay. All right. That's what I wanted to hear. But so dialing it back a bit, I was wanting to know, who are you actually up against so far as the Libertarian Party nominee? So far,
the only other candidate for the Libertarian Party nomination who is actively organizing to prepare for that is former Governor William Weld, who was the Libertarian Party vice presidential nominee in 2016 with Gary Johnson, both non-libertarians, libertarian-leaning moderates at best. And I think they represent a terrible corruption of the LP because they bring in people who aren't libertarians, they bust people into conventions, and they steal the nomination, essentially. And it's time that we nominate a real libertarian. So if I may brag about my campaign team and my support base here for a little bit here, we've done an incredible job in 2018 changing the party. And if you go back to 2014, the last year there was a convention without a presidential nomination, there were only about 400 delegates there out of 1,000 plus slots. Now, you know this from Georgia, right? Georgia had 31, was it 31 delegate slots?
It was 30, I believe. It was even 30, I believe.
Okay, and they were filled at the convention. In 2014, only 40% of the seats were filled, even at the convention, and you're able to fill the seats later. And for those of you who don't know how the LP works, every state has a state convention where they nominate delegates who go to the national convention, and they have a certain allotment for each. And the total, it adds up to roughly 1,000 delegates total. And in 2016, this is crazy. In 2016, at the end of convention season, only 800 of those 1,000 seats were filled. And a lot of them were filled because Gary Johnson campaign brought people into the state conventions. But then at the last minute, they filled those last 200 seats with Johnson Weld people. This is an embarrassment to the party and to the movement that we can't muster 1,000 people every 2 years who care enough about the party to show up and take control, because I have not heard a single complaint about the LP that could not be solved, not just addressed, solved by the single person complaining, showing up and doing something about it, even that they had the wrong nominee. And this might get a little wonky inside baseball, but forgive me for a second. This is going to be a lot of fun for people who can follow. In 2016, like I said, 800 delegate slots, 200 plus empty delegate slots. Gary Johnson and Bill Weld barely won the nomination by just a few points, which means that if either any of the serious other campaigns ran against him, John McAfee, Austin Peterson, Darryl Perry, if any one of them had just one person on their staff who knew what they were doing months in advance and made enough phone calls to get people to show up to the state conventions and to get people to show up to the national convention, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld would not have been the nominees in 2016. So this year, 2018, right now, we're about halfway through convention season. And so far, we have less than 15 empty delegate slots in the entire country. We are already on track to have less empty delegate slots in 2018 with no presidential nominations than we did in 2016 when Johnson and Weld won. We are fundamentally changing the party. 2018 is a very, very important year for the LP. And so far, it looks like we're on track to do just what we did in Georgia, because like you saw in Georgia, and were you at any of the prior state conventions in Georgia, or was that your first?
That was my first one, yeah.
Okay, so just going back on the average, right? You know, if it was an average state in 2016, it would have only had 24 out of 30 slots filled. In 2014, it would have only had 12 out of 30 slots filled. 2018, all of them. And that's been the case in almost every single state so far this year. And this is where I have to give credit to my team for helping organize this, for getting our people out to go to those conventions, and for the people who support this message and this campaign. And I've always said, it's not about me. It is about a line in the sand, but it's not about me. Regardless of whether I'm still here in 2020, it is absolutely critical that the Libertarian Party nominates a candidate who actually represents the message of freedom, who actually represents a consistent ethical message, who has a platform in line with the platform of the National Party, and with a sense of ethics that is in line with the party's statement of principles.
Yeah, I think that's two of the big reasons why we're seeing such a huge influx of delegates is, one, people are just completely disenfranchised with the Democrats and Republicans. I predict one of these parties becoming irrelevant very soon, and I have my money on the GOP because they keep preaching small government, but you think both of them?
We're going to make both of them irrelevant at the same time. But you know what, Brax, I can tell you, what you point out is a very important broader dynamic. That yes, the base of the Republicans and Democrats are fed up. They understand that none of those parties have their best interest at heart. That's not what is explaining the influx of delegates and activists into the Libertarian Party. It's taking real organizational efforts, because we have a beautiful movement, and the movement is much bigger than the party. But a lot of people have been driven away from the Libertarian Party because of candidates like Johnson, Weld, and Bob Barr. I cringe every time I say his name, but yes, Bob Barr, the nominee from 2012. And the fact that our campaign is showing them how easy it is to get involved with the Libertarian Party is getting people involved to come out to the state conventions. What you saw in Georgia was not an influx of Republicans or Democrats coming to be delegates. It was people who were libertarians who were sick of the Libertarian Party going, okay, Adam.
That was the part two I was getting to.
I'll come back. I'll come back to the party now.
Yeah. And I'm saying right now, as I've expressed interest in the LP, and you and a lot of the other guys ask us to be lifetime members. And I gotta say, if Sarwark, the current chair, if he stays in place in 2018, I'm washing my hands of it. But if we get a new guy in, I'm pulling for Josh Smith. By the way, if he gets in, I will sign a lifetime membership.
That's you know what, Brax. Oh, that's beautiful. And for people who don't know, that's a commitment for $1,500. It costs $1,500 to be a national lifetime member in the LP. And right now, our chair, Nick Sarwark, has a number of problems, a number of ethical challenges that he's dealing with, and it remains to be seen whether he's going to keep his seat, because that base of people that show up every year, that 400. They generally support him, although I'm very hopeful that he will be replaced. And Brax, I hope that you'll join us. I hope that you'll do part of you'll do your part in this. Are you a delegate for the national convention?
Yes, I am. I got a friend that's coming too, and aside from any work conflicts, I have every intention to be there.
Well, this is going to be now. There are basically, I can't take full credit for the influx into the Libertarian Party and interest in delegates. I also have to give credit to the Mises Caucus. And yes. Josh Smith is the nominee of the Mises Caucus. You're familiar. And we have to work together to make sure that we build this coalition of a clear majority to oust Nick. And I would hope that for you there at the convention, that you're actively lobbying, that you're actually actively talking to people and challenging people who say that they might be voting for Nick, because generally it would be out of ignorance. It would be because people don't know about maybe his Stratfor connections, or the ways that he's bullied people behind the scenes, or his support for Bill Weld, or other manipulations of the party, or the fact that he says he's proud that we don't raise or spend money, that he doesn't make adequate use of the platform of the chair. And this is one of the things I'm really excited about Josh potentially being chair, that he would be podcasting and blogging and getting out and doing media interviews as much as possible. But also we have another great candidate with Alicia Dern, and I'd be remiss to not mention her because she is a serious candidate with a lot of credibility. And I want to support whichever one of them is stronger going into the convention. But really, it's anybody but Sarwark. And the way I believe it works is that there's a kind of runoff voting. So if nobody of those three has a majority, then I'm counting on whichever of the two is weaker between Josh and Alicia to enthusiastically endorse the other and condemn Nick. And we really do need to make this an anybody but Nick kind of race, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's where I am with it. So you're running this Kokesh for no president on your No Force One. I was just curious. I heard you saying within 1 hour of announcing your candidacy, you got pulled over twice. Any other harassment you've been dealing with? Care to share?
Well, if you're gonna mention that story, I at least got to tell the complete summary. But yes, it was within minutes of our announcement email going out. I was pulled over for erratic driving. Right, this is in Texas, in the drug corridor that connects Denver to Houston, or rather just Denver to Dallas. and they really have a pretty vicious drug war racket there. And I was broadcasting my arrest, getting pulled over on Facebook Live, and I gave the officer the copy of Freedom, and I'm telling him about it. And I'm telling him who I am, and this is before we had the bus with the the big wrap around of my name in giant letters on the side. And 40 minutes later, I was pulled over again. And again, I was live streaming this, and I also had a video camera set up here in the RV, pointed at the door. And the first thing they did when the RV was illegally turn off that camera. But you can tell from the video that the officer who pulled me over was determined that I was going to leave in handcuffs. And he was willing to lie. He was willing to violate police procedure. He was willing to violate the law. He was willing to violate my Fourth Amendment rights in order to do so. And what they arrested me for, allegedly, although I don't know yet because I haven't seen any documentation about this, one of the crazy messed up things about how the legal injustice system in Texas works. I was taken to jail. I ended up doing 10 days in jail. And the main thing here that you can see from the video that's really offensive is that they used a drug dog as their excuse for ransacking my vehicle. And, the drug dog hit on my vehicle while my dog was in there. Not only in the RV, but whining at the door. So that the hit from the drug dog was the drug dog sitting down at the door looking in. That's giving the signal. While my dog, Baloo, is on the inside whining at the door. Baloo, you want to come say hi? Baloo, come here. Baloo, come be on this interview. So this is Baloo. Baloo. Now he doesn't. Baloo, come say hi. Yeah, he's like tired of this. See, when we got arrested together, there were more people concerned for him than there were for me, and I think rightly so. He is a survivor of police brutality. When my home was raided in Virginia a few years ago, he had a flashbang grenade. He's going back to lay down already. He's like, yeah, okay, another interview, Adam. Thanks. I get a cameo. When are you gonna let me talk? And he had a flashbang grenade thrown at him. So when we got arrested, he did I think 1 or 2 nights in doggy jail, and we had some friends bail him out. But the arrest, as you can see from the video, was a very, very false, very, very illegal arrest, and I'm going to do everything we can to sue the officers involved, the county involved, and I'm not going to take a single penny of the proceeds from that to fund the campaign or any of my political causes or for myself. Every cent that we get out of that, I am going to use to repay the other victims of the drug war in Wise County, and there are a lot of victims there. Now, some people hear that story and they go, oh yeah, conspiracy. Must have been Donald Trump saying got to squash the competition for 2020 early. I kind of doubt that's the case. And if when I see something like this, the way I usually look at conspiracies is to assign a probability range of possibilities. And from what I've heard, this is actually kind of a typical experience in Wise County. In fact, when most people go through something like this and they're recording with their cameras, with their phones, the response from the officers is, oh, you're recording? Well, now you're definitely going to jail. And when we get you in jail, we're just going to erase the footage off your phone. And I've heard, dozens of horror stories like that since I got out from people in Wise County. And in my case, they couldn't do that because I broadcast it live and had it posted on Facebook right away. That video footage is out there. But from what I understand, there's a small possibility, maybe 5-10% that this was all just a coincidence. Because they got cops all over the place there, really just looking to harass people for the drug war, raise revenue for the state, pay their illegal salaries. But there's a 90% chance then that this was some kind of conspiracy. And on one end of that spectrum, you have, it was Donald Trump. Very, very unlikely. But on the other end, and I think making up the majority of it, is that the officer who pulled me over first, who I gave a book to, said, "Hey, well, let me see what. Adam Kokesh. Let me look this guy up. Checked out my YouTube channel or my blog or my videos, and said, oh my gosh, this guy's a pro-drug activist. This guy's an anti-cop protester. Let's get him." And he called ahead and said, "Hey, you need to go get this guy." And I think that would be, adequate explanation for what happened. But there are some other theories in there along the lines of slightly lower than presidential conspiracies, namely that it was Bill Weld, perhaps, who wanted to make this happen, because it was right before the weekend that he was soft launching his campaign with a documentary produced by a convicted pedophile, with a fundraiser that he was supposed to be joined at by Nick Sarwark, but I was able to call him out through a podcast that I recorded while I was in jail. And Bill Weld is I believe it's a former U.S. attorney, former prosecutor, something of that nature. So he's definitely got some government connections with some very bad people capable of doing some serious evil. And I certainly would not have put this past him, but that's just speculation.
All right, and that's about all the harassment you've experienced so far?
Well, since then, I don't drive and I don't travel alone. And there have been a few incidents, nothing public, nothing with police like that we know of, except for some potential undercovers. But because we are still working on completing our own investigations into what happened with some of those incidents, there's nothing more I can say about that right now.
Okay. All right. Well, gonna get a little heavy on you here. All right. It's a heavy question, but I want to preface it with: have you heard of the Facebook page ANCAPs versus Minarchists?
Yes, I have, and I'm gonna cut to the chase for you right now and make this really, really easy, because the debate between anarchists and minarchists in the libertarian movement is really fucking dumb and unnecessarily divisive, because I have not heard a single libertarian define libertarianism in such a way that includes the idea that we should have rulers. Therefore, every libertarian is an anarchist, because anarchist means no rulers. And if you want to go further philosophically to say it means voluntarism, fine. I've never heard a libertarian say that their definition of libertarianism includes an excuse for using violence against peaceful people. So there are people who describe themselves as minarchists who believe that government should do just these things, this and this and this, but only voluntarily. Well, if you want government to do things voluntarily, then you're an anarchist as well. Now, from the perspective of an anarchist, if you're an anarchist, then you have to admit that you wouldn't have a problem with there being government as long as it's voluntary, right? That we want people to be able to form whatever legitimate associations they want by coming together in peace and cooperation. So every anarchist is also a minarchist. And you see that these definitions are really silly. But I would go even further, because if you're an anarchist, then you should have no problem with voluntary socialism, right? If people come together to form a socialist community, but it's voluntary, or a communist community, but it's voluntary, it's based on private property, contractual agreements, and people are free to leave at any time, oh my gosh, then I could say that as an anarchist, you're also a communist. You want to play these silly word games and divide people and argue about stupid shit all day long? Fine, be my guest. I think you should have better things to do with your life. But clearly, the important division is not between anarchists and minarchists. It's between people who believe in the core ethical principle of libertarianism, that all human relations should be voluntary, that is, free of force, fraud, and coercion. That's the line in the sand. Either you believe in ethics or you don't. Not that you believe in one particular vision of what society should look like once it becomes voluntary. No, that's bullshit. It's totally unnecessarily divisive. If we want to achieve a voluntary society, this is saying ethical society, we need to be able to separate our ethics from our aesthetics, how we want things to be conducted in an ethical way, from how we want things to look. Some people want society to look this way. Some people want it to look that way. We have to respect their preferences. And if anything, I think there's something sort of silly about saying I'm a minarchist and I want government to do just these things, or I'm an anarchist and I want government to do nothing, because either way, you're being a central planner. So by those definitions, both anarchist and minarchist is totally wrong. Voluntarist, libertarian, those are the terms that really matter, and ultimately we should unite under the term libertarian. Does that answer your question?
Well, actually, absolutely not even close, but I'm glad I put it that way, because I got a whole nother nugget out of it. It's a whole nother direction I was going with it. It's mostly a shit posting page, right? But every once in a while, they ask a really interesting question, and one of the ones I pulled off of there, this is like from 6 months ago, they asked, would you be willing to die to promote your ideals? And I found myself in like the selfish majority that was like, nope. And but I got to ask you, you're running for something, one of the most powerful positions in the world. You have people like Clinton and Soros out there very willing to unperson somebody if they threaten that power. So, I mean, you got to be shaking in your boots, man, right? How do you feel about all that?
The Marine Corps didn't teach me to be afraid.
Right on.
All men die. Not all men really live. I would rather die standing up for what's right, standing up for justice, than cowering under the tyranny that we experience today. That's my choice. And I respect people's choices if they don't want to make that same choice with me. But if enough of us take this stand, it's game over for government.
Well, I'd like to say I'm a big man, but you're a bigger man than I am. So, but I'm right there with you for the time being, anyways, until I get locked up in a re-education camp, I suppose.
Well, Brax, let me point something out though about that, because the reason this movement is possible is that humanity has advanced so far that we don't have to fight literally, physically, to stand up to injustice. It's an information war. It's a mind war. It's a thought war. It's a war for the hearts and minds of humanity at this point. And if we were still at that point where we had to fight violently, then it wouldn't be this movement. This movement wouldn't be possible. It would just be a movement to overthrow a particular tyranny, and you could say, no, that's not the way to go about things. Let's withdraw our support. And I think there are other people who do activism directly confronting police, as I've done in the past, who probably take a slightly greater risk than I do in running for president like this. I've had, when my home got raided, when Blue had a laser sight pointed at his chest, or had the flashbang grenade thrown at him, I had 3 laser sights pointed at my chest when that happened. I've been roughed up by the cops. If you've seen the Jefferson Dance Party viral video, you've seen me get body slammed, choke slammed by the police. And I think there are greater immediate risks faced by people who do that kind of police accountability activism than I do. And I just want to point out what a beautiful thing it is that humanity has come so far. We are living in the most peaceful times in human history today. It's an undeniable historical trend that you are less likely today than ever before to be subject to violence at the hands of another human being. And when you realize that freedom is what you have when no one is forcing your will on you, nonviolence is synonymous with freedom. And that's a beautiful thing to celebrate, that we have come so far. And that if you think that I am the one who is taking the greatest risk in standing up to the state in this way, and you have to make the case, well, maybe they'll assassinate you. It's so much easier than what the founders of this country had to do, standing up to the empire just to fight for independence.
That's true.
For self-rule. It's so much easier than I don't even know where to go back. So many examples just in American history. Where African Americans in the South had to stand up to lynch mobs. You know, I mean, even as recently as the 50s and 60s with MLK standing up to that kind of violence, there was a real threat of death. And I think I put myself in a situation now where if they killed me, more people would read my book and their racket would be over faster. You know, I think I've put myself in that kind of situation now where my work, my reputation, my record, the book are the greatest protection that I could possibly have. But if you don't want to see me die, join the campaign. Let's make these fundamental truths all the more undeniable.
Right. Now, just to clarify, it's not to say that I wouldn't be willing to die for a cause. It's just going into it not being so certain. The founding fathers knew no matter whether or not they're going to be there, that this was going to happen. Same with MLK, and I think you're right at the precipice of where you become so big that if you were to die, you would essentially be a martyr. So it's just, I think going out and leaving this world and not knowing, I suppose, would be what would scare me the most. But anyways, move on.
I know this is going to happen. Hey, Brax, hold on, Brax.
What's up?
You know that the federal government of the United States is not going to last forever.
Yeah.
You know that, now, maybe you didn't finish the book, but chapter 10 is my favorite. It's called The Future of Freedom. And you can see here, the sections in The Future of Freedom are the asymptote, the internet effect, the paradigm shift, education, activism, and agorism, localization, and is this a revolution? Now, one thing that I think is a sort of genuine, you know, like I said, I don't take credit for any of the ideas in this book. I'm the best rip-off artist in the freedom movement. I took the wisdom of all the best freedom manifestos and combined them into one easy-to-read, very accessible red pill. But the idea of the asymptote is somewhat original. And it comes from this idea that the human experience is not linear, but exponential. And we can see this now actually graphed out with technology. We can look at Moore's law, computing power doubling roughly every 18 months, whatever it is, doesn't matter. You look back at the course of human history, go back, you know, to before the invention of the wheel, and you can see that the human experience is exponential. That means that the amount of change that's happened in the last 10 years, just imagine the development of the internet in the last 10 years, is equivalent to the change that occurred over the last 100 years. And the change of the last 100 years is equivalent to the change of the last 1,000 years. And you could keep going here, right? The change of the last 1,000 years is equal to the change of the last 100,000 years. What that means is that the change that we've experienced in the last 10 years, we are now going to see in the next 1 year. And then we're going to see it in about a month, and then a week, and then a day, and then a matter of hours. Imagine that. Now, I know I passed high school algebra, that an asymptote of a function never goes to vertical. But from the perspective of what our human minds can comprehend, looking up at this change, when we have supercomputers that are just inventing the next faster supercomputers for us, it might as well be vertical. That's what we're coming upon, the asymptote of the human experience. And government is not going to survive it any more than black and white television or pet rocks or or slavery. Violence is obsolete already. We have already, as a species, embraced ethics almost universally. We just make this little exception here for government. And as soon as we stop trying to say that it's okay for government to use violence, it's done. This is going to happen within our lifetimes. And if a dumb Marine like myself can figure the United States in the next 15 to 20 years, I guarantee you somebody else is going to figure it out if something happens to me. But ultimately, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
These are forces of nature bigger than any one human being. I think we are at our most enlightened and fulfilled state when we align ourselves with forces of nature rather than resist them. And the choice that we all face right now is whether or not we want to be on the right side of history, because we know where this is going.
Yeah. Well, on a lighter note, I wanted to hit you up about something I heard you say at that convention. And I was hoping maybe you could explain it a little bit better to people, because there are a few libertarians out there that are more along the lines of pragmatism. They want to take a pragmatic approach. And I wanted to hear again how you put it, principle versus pragmatism.
Well, I don't know who you're talking about. I'm the most pragmatic libertarian there is. There's nothing pragmatic about keeping the federal government going. A lot of people use the excuse of pragmatism to get you to compromise your principles. And what we have seen over the last 3 election cycles with Barr, Johnson, Weld, is that that's not very pragmatic. When you compromise your principles, you get unpragmatic results. Principles are pragmatic. That's the point of having them in the first place, is they tell you what is the pragmatic thing to do.
Yeah, okay, cool. So one more thing I was going to ask you, so far as all your time on Adam versus the Man, I'm trying to hit all these little points real quick from my experiences with you. But on Adam versus the Man, I've seen you get body slammed and arrested for some of the dumbest shit. What would you say is probably one of the more absurd laws you'd like to see abolished? I don't know.
That's again like asking, what's your least favorite kind of cancer? All of them. The only law that is legitimate is the natural law that says, you own yourself and you have a right to own property, and it's wrong to violate the rights and physical persons of others. I mean, in terms of what I've experienced myself, there are 2 that stand out, and one was the dancing law at the Jefferson Monument. Although it wasn't really a law, but we did overturn the policy of enforcing this bullshit practice of trying to stop people from dancing by force at the Jefferson Monument. But also in Middleborough, Massachusetts, at one point they made cursing illegal.
Oh shit!
So we hosted a little cursing protest, and they left us alone. So I guess you could say we overturned that law with one protest as well.
Yeah, the dancing one. That was the one I always tell people about when I'm talking about your show. Like, can you believe this? But last question here. Many people in the liberty movement have accomplished great things. Some have climbed mountains. Others have been shot at and drop kicked off their lawnmower and beaten half to death for supporting what they believe in. Rand Paul, if you remember. So what would you say? And I'll set the bar way up there. What would you say is your greatest accomplishment?
Oh, I'm always looking at the next thing. I never look back. I mean, I might say putting this book together and self-publishing it, but even then, what I'm working on right now is Operation Big Easy Book Bomb. We're going to put a copy of this book in every single residential mailbox in New Orleans, 205,000, right before the Libertarian National Convention. Because I self-published this little book here, just 100 pages, cost me 40 cents.
You said
China.
30. You told us 30 cents.
Inflation. This copy, hold on, no. This copy cost 40 cents. My last batch was 30,000 copies for $12,000. At the next scale, we can get them for less than 30 cents. For this printing, it's actually going to be 27 cents each. And we can get them delivered by bulk mail through the United States Postal Service for just 30 cents each. So to deliver 205,000 is going to cost $123,000. And we've already raised most of the money that we need to do this. We still need to raise the money. So we've raised a little more than enough to cover the printing of the book. We still need to raise the money to cover the delivery of the book, and that's another $50,000 or so. So I'm going to be really focused on that over the next couple months, raising the last bit of that money. If anybody wants to support me on that, please go to thefreedomline.com and click on donate there. Check that out. Really appreciate your support. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Brax. But I got to say, that's, I'm always looking at the next thing, and that's what it is. We're going to deliver this message to every city and every mailbox in New Orleans. And after that, we're going to do the rest of the cities in this country until we've got this message in front of everybody. And Brax, I apologize. I don't know how long you want to go. I had this on my calendar for an hour.
Yeah.
And I've got someone waiting for me here to check into our Airbnb house so that we can have our campaign team meeting week here in Houston. So I got to sign off unless you have any real quick last questions, brother.
No, that'll do it, man. That's the end of my 30-minute interview I'd planned with you. But when you get a good talk going, it's hard to stop it. But yes, we will be including links and the details below. And thank you again for tapping into Critical Thoughts, breaking through the white noise to bring you the media that matters.